Hi, welcome to Unit 3 in ESLG 489. So what are we tackling in this unit? In this third unit, what we're going to do is to explore together some of the cultural experiences that those originally from or their families are from Central America might have. And we're also going to explore some of the issues that might be related to some of these experiences. So the unit kicks off with kind of a lengthy audio tape interview that I carried out with Luisa Oriana. And Luisa came as an asylee from El Salvador. And she will share her story with you. And in that story, you will also hear that she not only has learned English, but she's become an English teacher now in Spokane. She teaches at a local high school, and she also teaches refugees at the Monroe Street Center. During the interview with Luisa, there are three kind of topics that come up that I've followed up with other interviews I've done with people in our community. The first thing that she talks about, one of the first things she talks about is she talks about bullying as she's seen it play out with her students at the high school. And so what I did was I turned to a local ESL teacher who's just now completing her master's in social work. And she's done a little bit of work looking at bullying and suicide among refugee and immigrant populations. And so we'll hear from her. How does that play out? Does it look like the rest of the population? And what might be going on there if it does look a little bit different? And another issue that comes up in Luisa's story is she talks about coming to the U.S. as an asylee. I'm sure that at some point you've heard that word, but perhaps you've never thought about the difference between a refugee and an asylee. And for that matter, how is an immigrant different? Well, local expert Greg Cunningham is going to share with us what we as teachers in this profession should know about the differences between asylees, refugees, and immigrants, and what they have in common. So prepare to get some information that teachers in our field often don't have, and yet we need very much. Another thing that I followed up Luisa's interview with is an interview with Janine Derrick. And Janine teaches at University of Idaho. The reason that I turned to her for an interview is because over the last couple of summers, she's been making trips to schools in Nicaragua, just like I do. And I thought it might be good for you to hear what she sees when she goes in those schools, just like your fresh vision might see if you were to enter. And so you'll be able to compare and contrast, draw some connections with what Luisa describes as well in El Salvador. After you listen to those audio tapes with our community members, then we turn to some texts for you to read. There are three. The first was actually, I think I got it on Twitter. It's just kind of a popular topic, and it is debunking myths about Latino populations in the U.S. And so I think what it might do is it might help for you to clarify anything you're not quite sure about, or you've heard and you're not sure if it's a myth or if it's reality. And it'll also give you some information that you can use because one of your jobs as a teacher is to be an advocate for your students and to share information with others that creates a better learning environment for your students. So hopefully that article on debunking myths will help you do that. Where you go after that is you take a look at two articles that take a look at for students coming from Central America. The first one, the second article looks specifically at rural Mexican families moving to the U.S. And so it looks at what assumptions, what expectations, what behaviors and perspectives might students who've begun their schooling in rural Mexican classrooms, what might they be expecting in your classroom, especially where might those expectations not meet reality? And the final article is to take a look at some possible impacts, and this just talks about Latino culture, and what are some possible impacts that Latino students, some cultural impacts that they might bring to the classroom, and that it might impact their expectations of the classroom. Now, one thing I want to talk about is we've already talked about the difference between cultural competence and cultural humility. And I'm sure I've made it very clear where we need to be is cultural humility. That cultural competence got us to a certain place, and it was better than nothing. It was better than cultural cluelessness. But cultural humility is where we need to go. The third article that you'll read, I think there's some cultural competence in it. And one of the ways this shows up is if you're writing about cultural perspectives or cultural backgrounds or cultural experiences from a cultural humility kind of perspective, you will use lots of qualitative language. You'll say things like perhaps, might, may, things like that. So in other words, you're not saying this is the way it is. You're saying this is on the table and this might occur. And I think that third article is lacking a lot of that information. The third article, too, I think kind of paints some brushstrokes with a wide brush in ways that makes me just a little bit uncomfortable. So as you read those three articles, the first one is really kind of a popular culture article. The second one, I think, is closer to the way that I would like us to approach talking about culture. And the third one, I think, is a little bit more of the culturally competent perspective, but still worth taking a look at. And so I'd like you to see if you can notice that as well. And even through the way that I ask questions, especially with Louisa, I'm attempting, I'm not saying I'm being successful, but I'm attempting to use cultural humility in my approach to the interview. See what kinds of questions I ask and how I phrase them. And if I'm successful, what I'm doing is I'm creating an open-ended question in which there's lots of room for Louisa to give her response without simply trying to meet what she expects that I want. Also, I should be ready to listen. And also, I should be very, very respectful in the ways that I answer questions, ask follow-up questions, and in my listening. So hopefully I model that well for you. But I hope you enjoy the unit. And after you've made it through the materials, I'll meet you in the discussion. And let's talk about what struck us the most, what surprised us the most, or what really changed some of our ideas the most, or our learning the most in the unit. See you in the discussion.